Mrs. Lindsey Schwartz, welcome to the podcast.
I feel like that was such a formal introduction. Thank you for having me.
What's up, sister? I can be a little bit more informal too,
yeah.
right? Yeah, that's more your style. I'm really honored for you to be here on the podcast today. You are such a thought leader in community building and have really stepped into a whole new world for yourself and for building communities with women. And so I think there's just so much to get out of you today, so much value for the listener. So I'm really just excited to unpack it. And actually, before we get into it, and we didn't talk about this before we started recording, is like I really want to get into stuff that you normally don't talk about with people. Like you do a lot of podcasts. You have a podcast yourself, of course, the Powerhouse Women podcast, and I really want to get into like, what are the questions that people should be asking you? What are the things that really are deep? So we'll get into all that today, and I'm just really excited and honored for you to be here. So I appreciate you.
Oh, well, I'm already excited. I'm like, let's go. Let's do this.
Well, it's the beginning of the year, and I guess this is where I want to start is it's the beginning of the year. We're starting to think about what we want to accomplish this year. What are the big goals? What are our big objectives? And one of the things that you talk a lot about, and I've learned so much about this from you, is really becoming and stepping into a new version of yourself. And I really want to get into your story a little bit because you are on this unpaved journey where no one has really done what you're doing. You're doing it in a space that is really big, but also there's not a charted territory, charted path, and you sometimes probably feel uncertain about where you're going and whether what you're doing works, etc. And you're constantly having to up-level who you are and who you have to become as a leader. So I just want to kind of start there is tell us a little bit about that journey. Tell us about what works, what doesn't work. And, you've just been such a great example of this, up-leveling yourself and being the next version of yourself to get what you want. So just let's start there.
Well, thank you for that beautiful question too, because what I would rather be known as the fact that I'm in pursuit of my next growth and evolution, I'd rather be known as that person than the person who's achieved XYZ external result. Because that's the part I'm most proud of. And it's kind of cool we're recording this episode today because just about an hour ago, I finished an episode with a girl who has a podcast geared toward 20-somethings. And so a lot of the questions were like, what would you tell Lindsey at that point? And a lot of the conversation was around, gosh, I wish I could go back and tell that version of myself that you will never have an idea of who you want to be when you grow up. So the 38-year-old version that I am today still doesn't know everything that I'll achieve and accomplish. And the freedom that comes with that is so cool. Possibilities are endless when you don't have this finite path that you think you have to follow. And a lot of that, the opposite of that, is what I would characterize my life coming up through school, pursuing my first corporate job, really up until I kind of found my way into entrepreneurship. But the short version of it is I built one business, a health and wellness business, through a network marketing company, learned so much about myself through that process. I love that personal development is so steeped into the network marketing profession and had so much personal growth through it. And what I started to see was that in that industry, you're talking with a lot of people about what are their dreams, and then you're trying to connect to how you can help them fulfill it. And I would have so many conversations, especially with women, that sounded something like, well, I'm really inspired by what you've done, Lindsey. And really what they were saying is, I'm inspired by the social media version of your life, right? It's never as glamorous as people think, but they would say something to the effect of, I would just love to have a business of my own, or I've always had this idea. I don't think what you're doing is for me, but they would light up telling me about this feeling or this calling for more. And immediately I would kind of be like, okay, forget about this other thing. Tell me more. Tell me about this dream you have. And in the next breath, without fail, every conversation tended to turn to why they weren't ready, why they didn't know enough, why they felt afraid or felt like this vision they had was just too big for them. And every time I would sit back and go, wait a minute, did no one tell you everything you're describing? Yeah, I feel that every day. That's not the indication that you should stop or that you shouldn't pursue the thing that you're talking about. It's actually that is the sign that you're going in the right direction. If you feel stretched, if you feel like you're stepping into something unknown. And that was easy to say, and I really believed it because I was on this personal growth journey. But deep down, what no one knew is that I felt super restless. And I think I felt restless. Now I can look back and see that the reason I felt that way was I wasn't challenging myself. I wasn't really stepping into things that scared me or that I didn't know I could be good at. And none of that changed until I got to the point where I had this opportunity to write a book. And writing was never part of my life. I had no evidence that I would be a good writer. And it was the perfect opportunity to practice what I was preaching to these other women around me. And through that journey, saying yes to that project, writing a book, finishing the book, and we can dive deep into all of the personal growth that really
that must have been a process too. Yeah.
So when I think we get these opportunities in our life to make a new choice, to literally choose to become and step into this version of ourselves that we're always connected to. That version of you is the one that right now is kind of whispering. It's usually like, hey, like that, see that person, see all those things they're doing? Yeah, you could do that too. Or see that thing you're interested in and you're kind of curious about, but it scares you. Yeah, you should step into that. I think there's that little voice in a lot of us that just is telling us we're meant for more. And for me, the first time I chose to listen to that voice versus the fear over the voice that was saying, who are you to do that? Who's going to listen to you? Was saying yes to completing this book, which the book was called Powerhouse Women. And a lot of people don't realize, but there was never a plan for a whole other business and this global community of women. I just took the first step and followed through with that and kept saying yes to it, even when I really wanted to quit. And I tried to quit several times, but continuing to say yes to it and just out of curiosity to see what was waiting for me on the other side. And it was honestly, I kid you not when I say, I was 33 when I wrote the book. It was the first time I actually attempted something and finished it, not knowing if I was going to be good at it. Up until that point, I lived a life where I would only take these calculated risks that I pretty much knew I was going to be good at it if I said yes to it.
So in your community, when, that's a really beautiful story. And I think like, as I'm listening and I'm thinking about it, I can imagine that either myself or others are like, well, that's all great, Lindsey. And I think there are voices in my head that are saying like, you could become more, or you could take this risk, or you have this idea. And as you do this work, and if I come to you and say, hey, Lindsey, this is like, I have this feeling that I could be doing more and I should become more, but I'm afraid, or I'm fearful, or I'm scared, or I don't have the capital, or I don't have the resources, or I don't have the relationships, or what have you. Like, what is the advice you give to those people who need to either take that leap, or is it a process? Is it a program? Is it something that's like, listen, you need to be decisive and commit? Is it, what would you tell those people?
It's so different for every single person, but I do believe there's an underlying truth that clarity ultimately comes through action. And I think that's what I was always waiting for, was some sort of certainty that if I take this risk and I do this thing that feels really scary, can you guarantee me a result on the other side? But you don't get
it. Doesn't work that
clarity.
way.
No, of course not. And then a lot more people would be doing really crazy, bold things. But I think I was looking for the certainty when the certainty was there. It just didn't look the way that I wanted. And the certainty was, I'm going to grow in some way. But I wanted, like I was sharing just a minute ago, I was looking for the end result instead of looking at the whole game of it is, am I going to grow? Am I going to learn something new about myself? Am I going to learn something if I fail? And that was not a game up until that point of my life that I was even willing to entertain. I wanted to control all of the outcomes and only have it go one way. And thinking that if I could control the outcome and guarantee that I would be good at this or would succeed or whatever you have, what have you, maybe that's the way to say it, that was going to lead to the kind of life I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wondered, I woke up every day feeling restless and like there was more for me that I wasn't even dipping my toe into at that point.
You're also very aware of your thinking. Like you're very aware of how you're feeling, what's showing up for you. Has that always been the case? Do you get better at that? Like listening to your intuition, seeing, oh, wow, this is some anxiety or fear I'm feeling right now about this decision I have to make. And, what does that mean? And why is that showing up for me? I always talk about how important awareness is to success and our thinking about our thinking. So, tell us a little bit about your process and your journey for that.
It's so true. Self-awareness is one of the most valuable things any of us can develop. And no, I did not just wake up like that. I had this process of really falling in love at first with personal development, more traditional personal development. And then a couple of things I did along the way. I remember doing a weekend course called the Landmark Forum. And it was one of those experiences. So if you're familiar with it, it's one of those experiences that afterward you're like, whoa, okay, eyes opened to a lot of just maybe how I'm wired, but also this notion like, well, shoot, I can't go back to life before I found this out. So you're now in a position of 100% responsibility for your life. And when you step into that, although it's confronting, because a lot of times I would joke that it would be easier to go back to a world where I could blame my problems or my lack of results on someone else. But now that I'm viewing my life through the lens of 100% responsibility, it begs me to ask a better question. Like, okay, well, where is that pattern coming from, or what does that look like? So it started there for me in a lot of ways. That was a big turning point. And then through reading, through events, through books, and more recently in this season, I'm really drawn to even more of like the actual science behind change. So studying and learning from people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and you realizing how unlimited our minds actually are. And I'm a big nerd when it comes to all of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Because it just makes me feel like, oh, there's literally nothing that's limiting me.
That's right.
There's nothing. And that's a lot to be responsible for, though.
Yeah, it's I was listening to something last week about goal setting, and they were talking about how, I can't remember who it was, maybe I'll have to find it from the show notes, but they were talking about how important, there's so many programs for goal setting and creating a plan and all that, but there's one system within the body from a brain science perspective that actually is the only singular system in the body that is connected to setting goals and having goals achieved, and it's the visual system.
Interesting.
And I never really realized that and it's exactly what you're talking about, is when we have focus and we have clarity and we pay more attention to that and create visualization and all that, like how much more we can achieve. And Joe Dispenza talks a lot about that, of course. It's like, and it's limitless.
It's only limited by, I guess, really our imagination, our ability to imagine it. That's so good. Ooh, you'll have to share it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you're obviously having a lot of success and building this beautiful female forward community around the world. I always say the future is female. I have 2 daughters, super proud of that. As you've grown this community, what are some obstacles that you've had that you didn't expect? Some of the challenges that you had that you didn't really expect during your process or your journey?
Such a great question. And it ties to what we've been talking about, that really my business has only grown, and business, the community has grown to the extent that I'm willing to grow myself. And I don't think I fully realized how much inner work was required, meaning I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't know. I think it's a gift when you're blind to the personal growth you're going to have the opportunity to go through. One of which, I'll just give this as an example. I really struggled with a deep, deep fear of what other people would think of me. Sure. Fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, all of it. And that was ultimately going to limit the impact that I could make, because it limited my willingness to just show up and serve. It limited my willingness to be wrong publicly. And sometimes we got to put our ideas out there only to say 6 months from now, hey, I actually learned something new, and now I'm going to contradict everything I just told you. And I went through really a season that was such a gift. I even remember my faith is a really big part of my business, my life. And I remember praying and saying, okay, God, show me what's in the way. Now, if you're going to pray a show me prayer,
everything showed up.
You got to be ready for what's going to be revealed. And what I wasn't really prepared for, but also was I had the opportunity to really sit with someone who very much disagreed with me, very much had their view of me that was I was kind of an a-hole, like quite, that was really their reality of me. And it just was this opportunity to sit with something that I thought I was so afraid of and be able to, this is the shortened version of it, but through months of just, again, inner reflection, really asking myself, okay, where's the truth in this? It's triggering me because there must be something that either I perceive as true or it's actually, but I've got something to take responsibility for. Mm-hmm. But then once I was willing to be responsible for that and look at my own role in it, really just learn to be okay with someone having a view of me that I couldn't control. And to this day, that person is not in my life. That person probably still thinks I'm quite the a-hole. And learning to just have so much love, actual love, not phony, not fake, so much love for that lesson and the person it was delivered through. I realized that's the ultimate lesson in it, is that I could be okay with it. I don't prefer it. I still would prefer if everyone thought I was the greatest and laughed at all my jokes and thought I was amazing. And that's not the reality of someone who's out there publicly in a big way, making a big impact. It's just not. And it set me free in a lot of ways. So there've been so many lessons like that. That's just one that I remember being so personal and so freeing at the same time. And it did take me several months to work through and come to the other side where I can share it in the way I'm sharing it right now. And I'm so grateful for it. To this day, I really hope that the other person grew as much as I did through it, because I think those are those things that I think I'm the most afraid of. What if the thing you're trying to prevent from happening right now is actually the situation, the scenario that holds the keys to your biggest lesson? Would you welcome it in?
Mic drop. Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful. Dude, you are so eloquent about all this. Like it's pretty impressive not impressive, but just amazing how aware you are and how eloquent you are about your thinking and your process as you manage these emotions. I think there's a lot of lessons and gifts that people can get from just listening to that. Like, it's really amazing. What is your vision for Powerhouse Women in the next 10 years or a decade or maybe legacy? What do you hope it becomes?
That's such an interesting question, because I think one of the gifts I was given early on was the gift of not being able to see very far in the future.
I love that. Actually.
I didn't know where we were going. I look back, we're about 5 years in. In April, it'll be 5 years since the book was published, and that really set the chain of events that led to where we are now. Lindsey 5 years ago could not even believe. I would have been so paralyzed by the view of the life that I have now if I had been able to see it. So I think there's really two sides to it, because in a way, saying that I don't see super far in the future started to become a little bit of a crutch, I wasn't even pushing myself to see a bigger vision. So I've opened myself up just recently to really leaning into even just imagining what could it be like. And one of my favorite exercises, we call it unicorn brainstorming, which is just asking the question and then filling in the blank. Wouldn't it be cool if? So allowing myself to go there, but I think it's finding the balance between leaning into a vision that makes me feel, quite honestly, like I'm gonna puke, like it's expanding me. This whole conversation is about expanding me.
That's right.
And then being unattached to an outcome, leaving room for the miracles or the twists and turns. So the answer right now, from where I'm sitting now, which you're getting the answer from the Lindsey right now. And the Lindsey 10 months from now is going to be a whole different person. I can't even imagine 10 years.
Oh, baby.
I don't think this is the only business I'll ever grow. I think that I'm building community right now to be able to solve problems on a bigger scale. I'm obsessed with the idea that if we can get more women into action around their ideas, what if we have a cure for cancer that someone has right now? They're just afraid, they feel like an imposter, they're not getting started. I think there's deep impact that I won't even ever get to see on this side of, the spectrum of life. Maybe when I get to the afterlife, I'll get to see all the dots connected. But I also think there's an opportunity to bring more resources together that help women move through their ideas faster. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's interesting to just speculate about what that could look like.
Yeah, if I'm picking up what you're putting down, basically, as you get an idea and people feel mobilized, like what are the resources they need? What are the resources they need to increase the probability of success for their idea to come to life, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Foster entrepreneurship.
And it could look, I imagine it's going to look a lot different than I can see right now. But what we've really honed in on is this idea that I think a lot of what stops women from fully seeing that vision through is a lack of community. They don't currently have others around them pouring belief into that idea. And especially at the early stages, I always say it's easiest to kill a big idea when it's in seed form, before it's grown fruit, before it has roots. And, now it would be so much harder for someone to talk me out of this vision. Like if they could say, you suck, no one's listening to you. And I'm just like, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
In the beginning, from the right person, that could have stopped me altogether. So community, lack of community, we're providing that. Lack of mentorship. We're providing mentorship in all different forms to just really give some tangible next steps and make it feel less overwhelming. There's an interesting whole other world to me, which is the lack of access to capital and resources. I don't think for most of us, we don't need, VC funding to get our ideas off the ground. It could be $5,000 to launch an idea. And there are options. Crowdfunding is a great one. There's great options, but I don't know what that'll look like. But I do feel like that's in some way the next partnership we pursue, or just the next element we really educate women around, so that they're not afraid or intimidated to have the conversations necessary, because money is usually required to get these ideas off the ground.
I want to take a 90-degree turn into relationships and the paradigms and expectations of society. So one of the things and when we first met, I got to meet you with my wife and Elliot, and we were all together. And that was a really amazing time. Really, really honored to meet you both at the same exact time. And one of the things we were talking about was, the dynamics of relationships and being in a relationship with two very different people. And specifically with you, what I want to talk about is, you are, firstly, Elliot's an amazing dude, and we've become close friends, but also, you are a very strong-minded, powerful, ambitious woman. And one of the things we were talking about was how men deal with that, and how men, in contrast to being the major breadwinner, how do we deal with that mentally, and how does that show up in our relationship? But then also societally, I think our society, as progressive as we are, still don't quite understand this dynamic. And I want to understand it from your perspective on, I really, having 2 young daughters, I'm very aware and conscious of this dynamic in our society and in our culture, our Indian culture for sure. We say that we are very progressive, but these underlying judgments and exist, and they're very deep rooted, right? And I believe that if we really want to make magnificent progress in humanity in the next couple of generations, like, we need to have openness, and we need to really drive this from both sides. And so I just wanted to get your perspective on that and what you see, how it's affected you, and what are the conversations going on around this topic?
It's such a deep question and so many layers. Again, depending on how each of us grew up, we're going to have a different context to see that through. And it's so interesting, you mentioned just even within your own culture, how there's really this desire to evolve. And then we don't realize we hit these, it's almost like we hit these roots as we dig deeper. We don't realize there's a root there that has changed the way that we perceive ourselves, our partners, other people around us. And again, you've mentioned this a few times. I'm just a very observant person. I just find people fascinating. I love to study people, and there's definitely people that, as I've observed them, I aspire to be more like them. And I think I've always been drawn to relationships that feel like just the safest space for both partners to evolve. I think it's no wonder then that I attracted a partner like Elliot, who from the moment I met him has always seen me as the highest version of myself. And you would think, what a blessing it is. Of course, a blessing. I didn't expect how much I would have to deal with the things I made up about what a woman should or shouldn't do. And so I'm in a partnership where that wasn't even my reality. I wasn't getting pushback from my partner. I was making it up. And
you were creating those frameworks. Right?
Where did that come from? I don't know, because I have extremely supportive parents in an environment that it completely fostered my ambitions and things like that. So to answer your question, it's so individual. There are layers upon layers to it. But here's what I've observed from, especially being sort of unintentionally this, leader of a women's movement, which could easily come across as, I am woman, hear me roar,
Sure.
Move out of my way. And I remember even before my book came out, it was a very critical time in history where there were marches happening for women. And I'm obviously all for the advancement of women. And I just remember having this fear that I would be pigeonholed in a certain way that actually wasn't representative of how I truly feel, which is I think we do need both, like you're saying. I think we need to elevate both. I think there's room for conversation. And Elliot, true Elliot fashion, said, babe, there's like millions of women at that march. Let them all buy a book. We'll sell a book to them. So, just having this ability to, number one, self-reflect. And number two, decide what works for you and the kind of relationship, partnership you want to be in. And then just be really hyper aware of where you're going to hit those roots or those triggers. One of mine was when I started to earn more money, all of a sudden it came out of nowhere. A very real fear felt so real to me, even though I logically knew it wasn't true, that Elliot would leave, that me having too much success would emasculate him or push him away.
Sure.
Now, there was no physical evidence whatsoever, never had been. But why did that fear seem so real? Mm-hmm. And it's deeply rooted in, I've always had a fear of outshining other people, of driving people away, of being the ambitious one. And all of a sudden it was like at my front door, within the relationship that matters most to me. So how we worked through that, of course, I had my own personal reflection and work around it, but really open conversations and just telling him, hey, I'm feeling this. It has nothing to do with you. There was literally nothing he did that triggered it. I just need some extra support through it. And one of my favorite books is called The Big Leap, and it talks about like these upper limits. And I think for me, it was actually just a huge upper limit. I knew deep down I was going somewhere new that was going to require a lot more of me. And the subconscious mind is real smart. It knows all of our fears, all of our deepest insecurities. And that was the one that it decided to play upon to try and keep me in this little box that I was comfortable in. And so it took some work, some really honest conversations. It was never affecting our relationship negatively, but it was really stifling this growth that I knew I was stepping into. And and that's the thing to know, I think, is when the fears come up, whether it's around a relationship or whether it's around, sometimes it's alienating a friend, or it could look any way, it feels really real in the moment. And that was one area, specifically in my partnership with Elliot, that I had no idea that would show up at all. And I think it's given us a really cool opportunity to talk to other couples just about the dynamics, because sometimes it's maybe the male partner that gets triggered by the woman's success. So we certainly are not experts on the subject. We only have our personal experience with it. But you're bringing up such a great topic. It's so deep, and I think every couple is unique. Seek help, seek professional counseling help to work through things like that, because I just believe so firmly in, I think, having a vision, not just for your business, but for your marriage, your partnership too, is so critical, that you don't have to choose business success or relational success. You can have both if that's the vision you're living into, and then be willing to do the work that it requires to have both.
Ooh, I love all of that. I mean, I think what's showing up for me is it's so clear that when you're trying to make huge leaps, you're going to grow, you're going to change, and you may have to leave things behind. And in some of our most key relationships, to have just open dialogue about these are my fears. This is what I'm concerned about. This is what I have anxiety about. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, but just love through it and create some space through it. I think it's a really important lesson to communicate about this as you're going through these major leaps. I love that. And as we're talking about this, for you right now in your life, what is your biggest fear?
Ooh, my biggest fear. So a lot of my growth right now, which maybe would point me to where the fear is around, I am required to step into a new level of leadership in order to keep up with the growth that my vision is demanding. Here it is. Oh. I knew I'd get to it. So it's becoming very clear to me this year that my next evolution is going to come from a really uncomfortable letting go of control.
Ooh.
So the fear, I don't like giving up control. I really like to be in control. And I'm just very clear it's going to come from allowing myself to be supported on such a deep level, taking my hands off of things that I really, really like to be in the little details of. And now I just know that where the discomfort is, I head straight there, because that's where the next growth opportunity is. But it's friggin' uncomfortable, giving up control.
That's so good. And I think there's no one else that ever has experienced that. So I don't even really know what you're talking about.
It's just really unique to me.
It's really just unique to you. Tell us a little bit about, you perform at such a high level. As a high performer, I'm always curious about other people's routines, on how they get into that state, how they get into that rhythm. Do you have a routine or a daily schedule that gets you into peak state?
I love that. I always love hearing other people's answers too. So I'm going to have to go back through your episodes.
Yes.
I do. I'm actually I'm a very disciplined person, a very routine person. So part of my routine has been learning to allow it to flow a little bit. Really paying attention, instead of being I'm up at 5 a.m., I go to the gym, I do this, actually tuning in, because this has been part of the work of slowing down and letting go of control, is tuning in and just asking what do you need today? Do you need to sleep in? Do you need to move in a different way? So it's kind of this balance between really keeping true to my commitments and having overarching commitments and things that I know whether or not I want to do them, really serve me. Movement, connection time with really high up-leveled friends who are having up-leveled conversations, eating a certain way, drinking or not drinking certain things. So there's that macro level kind of like routine of making sure I have my commitments to myself, but with enough flexibility that I can change from day to day what that looks like. The biggest routine right now that I was actually thinking about this, driving to meet with my running partner today, which is one commitment I have, is an absurd amount of mindset work. Every moment of the day. Sometimes I need quiet. I actually need to be completely in silence by myself to really be working or focusing. If I'm listening to anything, it's something that's reminding me of the power of my own mind. So a lot of Joe Dispenza right now, certain podcasts, and then just having it be okay. Like podcasts I used to love and be obsessed with, I'm not listening to it all. It's all around mindset, leveling up, because I can tell I'm at a really cool tipping point. Sure. And I require every single day a reminder of how powerful my mind is, because I wake up and I don't feel that positive and I don't feel that motivated, truly. And so I go right to work on I know what it feels like when I'm in that zone of who I want to show up as. And I'm just breaking some really deep patterns right now. I can tell, I can physically feel it. So mindset work, and then those overarching rituals that really serve me.
I love that. And if people want to listen to more of that, you just put out a couple of really good episodes on that in your podcast. So I encourage people to listen, because I just listened to them about how to get into that state. So I guess as we wrap up, let me ask you our final question for you. What does it mean to live a rich life?
It's so much simpler than I think my younger self believed it was. I feel that the state of being rich is an embodied state. I don't think it has anything to do with externally what's happening around me. To me, it means that I am fulfilled spiritually, relationally, physically, and it's a state of fully being who I'm being, whole and complete. And it just so happens, I feel like I'm just kind of tapping into this universal truth that when you live like that, when you actually focus your energy on living that way, all that other crap you thought you wanted actually comes and kind of easily, but then you don't even really care or want it, because the end goal the whole time was just a state of wholeness as a human. That was very philosophical, but that's where I am right now.
That was I feel
like I'm learning it.
That was a Buddha answer, girl.
You bring this out of me.
Love it.
I'm telling you.
I love it. Well, look, Lindsey, really just sincerely honored that you're here. So much knowledge, so much wisdom. If people want to reach out to you or follow you or learn more about you, how can people get in touch?
Yes. Well, you mentioned the podcast. If you're a podcast listener, Ashish just showed you don't have to be a woman to listen to the Powerhouse Women podcast.
That's right. I listen to her podcast.
That's right. Yeah, it's for everybody. We even have a couple episodes with Elliot on there. So, equal opportunity. So I would love, if you're a podcast listener, you love growth, you love business, the Powerhouse Women podcast is one of my favorite places to connect. And then all of our, offerings, our membership community, all of that is linked in our Instagram bio. That's usually the easiest. So it's just Powerhouse_women. And would love to connect with the fellow ambitious women who love your work, because those are clearly like-minded people who I would love to know. And we'll put all your handles and social media stuff in the show notes. But sincerely, thank you so much. Honored that you're here, and wish you continued success as you endeavor on this beautiful journey of creating this movement. So thank you so much. Thank you. Just so honored to be here.